So what does the face of a child abuser look like? Is he the creepy guy in a trench coat or the stranger who offers them sweets from an ice cream van? Or maybe it's someone they know, the trusted uncle, a friend's dad, the water polo, a football coach. In all those scenarios, the perpetrator we imagine is a man, isn't it? Have you considered that it could be a woman? 41% of boys who've been sexually abused reported they were sexually assaulted by a woman, according to a 2008 study. And today, preschool teacher Amberly Hughes, who is accused of raping and murdering her lover's 4-year-old daughter, will find out what her fate will be, whether she's guilty or not, in the Johannesburg High Court. Somebody who's been looking at this kind of story and many others is Robyn Wolfson Vorster, who's a child protection activist and founder For the Voiceless, who joins us now on the line. Robyn, a pleasure to have you on the show. We all think we know what the predator is going to look like, don't we?
Yes, good morning, Bongani, and good morning to your listeners. I think it's a very pertinent statement. We do. We are trained from childhood to suspect strangers of being perpetrators. And as you mentioned in your intro, often it's the ones who look creepy, the ones who we can pick out in a lineup. But actually, often perpetrators are people that we know well. And unfortunately, although the perception is that they are mostly men, perpetrators of sexual abuse of children can also be women. Yeah. And although that study showed particularly around boys, what it didn't show was how many girls are also sexually abused by women.
Do we have any idea of how prevalent female perpetrator abuse might be?
Unfortunately not. So globally, the statistics vary. It could be as much as 1 in 4 globally, but it seems like our studies show, particularly related to boys, that the numbers could be a lot higher. And what we do know about this crime is that it's very seldom reported. So in fact, particularly around the abuse of girls by women, those crimes very seldom end up being either there's very seldom an arrest and there's very seldom a prosecution. So we actually have absolutely no idea how many of these cases are going on behind the scenes.
How much does the assumption that it could never be, the loving auntie, the adoring female figure, how much does it allow those perpetrators to operate with impunity undetected?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons why my organization is called For the Voiceless is because children are often muted in our society. And there are few children that are as extremely muted as the survivors of sexual abuse, especially where it happens to be a trusted auntie or a loving female family member. Because you can imagine when those children try and tell their stories, how easily they are disbelieved. And how easy it is for adults to go, well, it couldn't be. I mean, we hear this narrative over and over. Women do not sexually abuse children. And so imagine if you've plucked up the courage to finally tell about what has happened to you. And the first thing that you're met with is the stony wall of, well, it couldn't have happened. That is incredibly crushing for children. And many of those children end up internalizing that hurt, and they don't ever they turn it inwards and they don't ever process it or deal with it in effective ways.
Robyn, for illustration, I'm going to ask you to tell 2 stories, truncate them as much as you can, but give us the essence of it. Let's start with the Beth Amato story.
Yeah, so Beth is an incredibly brave survivor. She tells the story of having been sexually abused by her loving and trusted nanny when she was a little 5-year-old girl. It happened in the bath. And I think for Beth in particular, what was incredibly horrific around this story was that this was a trusted, just loving family member, because she had effectively taken over the caregiving role in the family. But also her mother in particular never accepted the fact that this nanny had abused her. And the nanny stayed in the family's employ until she retired many decades later.
Gosh, there was another case, again, bath time abuse, Martin Pelder?
So Martin has been very outspoken about his story, and I think it's been incredibly healing for a lot of people. Martin's story is, I mean, I don't think there's, I run out of superlatives in terms of horrific, but Martin's abuser was his own mother, and she used to come into the bath when he was bathing as a child, and sexually abuse him. And he has flashbacks of even other forms of horrific abuse, including oral sex, from when he was even smaller. And again, this is something he could not protect himself from at all, and it occurred throughout his childhood.
We are, of course, partly talking about this because there's a case that will be delivered, where judgment will be delivered this very morning in the Johannesburg High Court, the Amber Lee Hughes case. Again, let's use that word horrific because she is accused of raping and murdering her stepchild, her lover's child.
Yes. So I think Amber Lee Hughes's case, I think, has in a way put this issue in the spotlight in the way that other cases have not. Because I think that even when we acknowledge the abuse of children by women, we tend to think of what we call the sort of the Mrs. Robinson narrative.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of an older woman seducing a teenage boy, and I use the seducing in inverted commas, a teenage boy kind of awakening the sexual identity in him. And it's seen as being a bit of a fantasy. It's seen as being something which boys would aspire to. We don't actually speak about the abuse element of those cases, but we can romanticize it to a degree. But when you have a case like this, which is a 4-year-old child who was sexually abused by an adult woman, preschool teacher, caregiver in the family, I think what that brings to light is the absolute cruelty and horrific nature of these kinds of crimes, because that child would have been absolutely defenseless. Against, if Amber Lee Hughes is found guilty, then that nature, that torturous part of her life, because it wasn't just one incident. The forensics found that there was existing evidence that she had been sexually abused before, and what that tells us is that this child had effectively been tortured over a period of time.
Goodness me. And what do we need to rethink about even how the law works around this? Because as you say, this idea that women cannot be rapists is something that we need to contend with. I mean, the law is quite clear now in South Africa about what rape is, no matter who the perpetrator might be. But when we think of women who are found guilty in these types of cases, do we need a rethink?
I think we definitely need a rethink, because the law might be clear, but in terms of our policing and in terms of our ability to pursue these kinds of cases, I think we're incredibly limited. So I think if there is a guilty verdict, if she is guilty and she's found guilty in the Amber Lee Hughes case, I think that is going to be a precedent-setting judgment, because what it's going to do is it's going to open up the need for us to interrogate these issues more clearly. And I would say that it needs to go throughout society. We need to be changing the narrative around the way that we speak to children around abuse. We also need to be changing our safeguarding strategies at schools, because I can almost guarantee that most schools are not looking at female teachers as potential predators against their children. And let's just bear in mind that this was a preschool teacher. So the horrific thing that we have at the back of our mind is, here we've got one case, but what could have happened if she had continued to teach? We don't know if she had the predilection to abuse other children. So I do think that we need to rethink our strategies around female perpetration. And specifically, it begins with the acknowledgement that this actually can occur, and that this is an issue which we need to take seriously as a society.
Indeed. Robyn Wolfson Vorster, child protection activist and the founder of For the Voiceless.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.